We are here today. We have the pleasure of joining David Pearce in Portugal. I came to Lisbon to meet him and talk to him for a couple of hours. And we're going to talk about his philosophy and everything that has to do with reducing suffering in the world at the local level, at the global level, at all levels. I've been very worried about suffering, especially in nature, because there is so much suffering in nature with all these animals having quite horrible lives often, and very painful lives. And I learned about David Pearce around 2003, 2004, when I started reading a lot about transhumanism. He is the founder of the World Transhumanist Association, today called Humanity Plus, and he's a philosopher focusing on exactly this topic, reducing suffering. So I could talk about him for a while, but you'll be able to read up on him. He's a huge philosopher in this area, and we're going to ask him to summarize his philosophy over the years for us in layman terms, so it's not very complicated for people to understand in Spain. But what did you write initially in '97, and what have been the follow-up writings or books or thoughts that have really captured you and made you think about these topics for so long, so deeply, to put all of this in writing and inspiring a whole movement around it, which is, I would say, the more moral side of transhumanism, honestly. We want to make the world a much better place. We want to extend human lives and everything else, but we also worry, especially in Alianza Futurista, since day one, we've been very concerned with the suffering of animals, non-human animals, and we want to do justice to it. So we want to have several conversations about it with you and other people who might want to talk to us, to help educate people and to help have a conversation with the wider public about it, because in Spain it's relatively small movement still, animal rights movement, although they're doing much better, and PACMA, Partido Animalista, PACMA, is doing quite well. They're about to get their first seat in Congress, and we're all very proud of that. But yeah, it really should be much bigger. There's a lot of animal exploitation. There's huge factory farming. There's a lot of these things going on, and we're worried, and we would like that to change sooner than later. So I'll let you speak in general lines, take as long as you want, about your philosophy, your ideas, and summarize it for the average viewer.
Sergio, thank you. Thank you for everyone listening, watching. Yes, back in the year 1995, I wrote an online manifesto, The Hedonistic Imperative, which calls for the use of biotechnology to phase out suffering throughout the living world and replace the biology of suffering with life based on gradients of intelligent bliss. And in 1998, I co-founded with Nick Bostrom the World Transhumanist Association. Transhumanists, and this is an oversimplification, want to create a triple S civilization based on super intelligence, super longevity, and super happiness. And though I endorse all three supers, my particular focus has been on the problem of suffering and how to create a world based on gradients of intelligent bliss. Now, how on earth does one fix the problem of suffering? That sounds impossibly grandiose, but we are now in a position to actually lay out technical blueprints for getting rid of all experience below hedonic zero. By hedonic zero, I mean just unpleasant experience. Starting with humans, I would urge a world in which all prospective parents are given access to pre-implantation genetic screening, counselling, and soon CRISPR genome editing, so they can choose benign versions of genes, different alleles and allelic combinations for their children. Even a handful of genetic tweaks could essentially fix the problem of suffering. Now, it goes without saying that there are all manner of pitfalls, dangers, risks, moral hazards, technical hazards, but if we're ethically serious about fixing the problems of suffering, and anyone who isn't disturbed by suffering, just hasn't really understood it. If we're ethically serious, it's actually possible to fix the problem of suffering. And I think anyone who intends to have children, bring new life, potential suffering in the world, has a responsibility to minimize and eventually abolish suffering in their children and their grandchildren. So one strand, very important strand of the Abolitionist Project is making sure that all prospective parents have the right to choose everything from the hedonic set point to the approximate pain tolerance, pain threshold of their future children. Very happy to go into some of the...
and hopefully their own, if we can achieve this kind of modifications.
Very much so, yes. It's going to... Already the first gene therapy for existing individuals has been introduced, but within the next few decades it'll be possible for existing human and human animals to have this therapy too. So it's not just a case of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Existing people can benefit, have their hedonic set point, pain tolerance raised. Sorry, the hedonic set, bit of jargon that, sorry, hedonic set point. Each of us has an approximate level of well-being or ill-being around which we tend to fluctuate in the course of a lifetime. It's the so-called lottery paradox, very counterintuitive, but 6 months after either winning the national lottery or having a terrible accident that leaves you paraplegic, quadriplegic, most people will have reverted to their previous average level of well-being or ill-being before the win or the tragedy. And the central nervous system has this web of negative feedback mechanisms that stop most of us being very happy or very unhappy for long, the so-called hedonic treadmill. And rather than abolishing the hedonic treadmill, it's going to be possible to raise hedonic set points so that your default is much higher. Just imagine waking up tomorrow morning in extremely good mood, but with your core values, preferences, and relationships intact. And yeah, this is the purpose of hedonic recalibration. We want to make sure that critical insight, social responsibility, intellectual progress can be maintained, sustained, and ideally improved, but at the same time increase default well-being.
So that would be like your baseline happiness. So you
Baseline
want
happiness,
everybody
yeah.
to be as happy as they normally would be on a very happy day and never below, essentially. So things like depression would disappear.
Yes.
Because that's a major societal problem. And there is so much depression, there is so much concern. We are very concerned with people who are suffering. We've had friends who have had depression, and it's a huge concern of our party. We always talk about it amongst ourselves as well. And this would be amazing to be able to get some kind of genetic predisposition to being permanently happy. We know some people who have this, like Anders Sandberg is very happy all the time. we know people who are predisposed to being happy all the time with a big smile in your face. And that's really what we want for everyone. So you can only experience levels of bliss, like you say, of immense happiness, but never below a certain base level of, I feel great this morning.
It might sound a subtle distinction, but it's really important between blissful and being blissed out. And someone like Anders, who if pressed will say, I have an extremely high hedonic set point, it is not as though his well-being is uniform. And he is a highly socially responsible, intellectually productive member of society, indeed a distinguished academic, but his set point is just much, much higher than the rest of us.
Yeah.
And a discussion about depression can itself be very depressing, but yeah, depression is an absolutely frightful disorder. It's extremely common, partly for evolutionary reasons, and yeah, essentially the problem of depression needs to be fixed, and it is potentially fixable. And whereas a standard route involves taking drugs which have limited efficacy, and we need scarcely recite all the problems of mood brightening drugs, if we can ensure that everyone has a healthy default, essentially we will have phased out, one of the biggest scourges of mankind, indeed, all social animals who can get depressed. So anyway, that's one strand of the Abolitionist Project. The other strand is the plight of non-human animals in our factory farms and slaughterhouses. And one can say, in the abstract, or fairly abstract, that a pig is as sentient as a small child. But how many people are actually prepared to think through the implications of what this statement means when considering factory farmed pigs in factory farms and slaughterhouses? Now, one of the other definitions of transhumanism, beside the three supers, is technical solutions to ethical problems. And though I would strenuously urge anyone listening to go vegetarian and ideally vegan, transhumanists, they're interested in technical solutions, and we're a society poised on the brink of a cultured meat, farm-free, animal product revolution that will ensure that it'll be possible for consumers of meat products, without changing their diet at all, to switch to cruelty-free products that are lab-grown, factory-grown, rather than from butchered non-human animals.
And we should stop here briefly to explain that this meat is identical to real meat. It's produced in a lab or in a factory, but it's structurally identical, regardless of the type of meat that you make, if it's going to be a beef meat or chicken or a fish or even later milk and egg type substitutes. It will be molecularly or at a cellular level identical. It will taste exactly the same. It will simply not involve hurting animals to produce it. So all we always ask as well for the regular person watching us is that whenever this becomes available in a mass scale, that you try it out, that you use it, that you choose it. It'll also be cheaper than meat because of economies of scale and how much it takes to produce an actual steak. It takes like an enormous amount of water, an enormous amount of feeding the cattle, etc. So, and in the meantime, I always say, if you can reduce your intake of meat, that's better than nothing. If you can teach others to try to go vegetarian or just eat a little bit of meat, the minimal possible to make a dish, is better than eating too much of it all the time. Not only it's bad for your health to eat so much meat, it's not that natural, but it's just much better for reducing the exploitation, to reduce the numbers. If you're eating a tenth of the meat that you used to eat, it's better than if you don't change anything, obviously. If everybody did that, you should think about it like that too. If everybody did this, then obviously the industry would have to be cut down by 9/10 or whatever. But it would have to be done globally or as big as possible. But we can start small with our homes and our friends and our country, and then teach by example, basically.
Yes, it is a fortunate coincidence that adopting a plant-based diet is correlated with lower all-cause mortality. In other words, switching to a vegan, vegetarian diet does not call for heroic self-sacrifice.
No,
indeed, you're actually likely to live longer, have a slimmer waistline, and it's even correlated with higher intelligence. So yeah, so no heroic self-sacrifice is called for. But yeah, for people who refuse to give up meat, it's going to be possible for them to continue to do so, but without the cruelty. Some people will still say, but it's unnatural. But anyone who actually studies the nature of factory farming, it is grotesquely unnatural.
Everything is, hospitals are unnatural.
Unnatural. Clothes are unnatural. Some of the biggest advocates of a natural lifestyle, of course, they do so wearing clothes. We tend to be very selective in our conception of the natural and equating the natural with the good.
We should also point out that David has never tried meat in his life. He was raised a vegetarian by your parents, right? Because this might shock a lot of people. You've never tasted meat. When I heard it the first time, I was kind of surprised, but it's quite amazing. It's quite wonderful, because if you haven't tasted it, you won't miss it, like some people who have been raised on it.
Yes, like kind of obviously the chastity of a eunuch in in a brothel or something like that, it's an accident of birth that I've never tasted meat. So in that sense, being moral is easy for me. I'm a third generation vegetarian. 3 of my 8 great grandparents apparently were vegetarian too. So in that sense, it doesn't involve any sacrifice at all. But of course, most people have grown up eating meat. It is normal and natural in that sense. And if you look around you and you see people eating meat, they're not monsters, they're civilized people. But there's a disconnect between elegant, civilized diners and the horror of what is going on in factory farms and slaughterhouses right now. So I would urge everyone to look into your hearts and really think, do I want to pay for such horror? I mean, I suspect that our descendants will look back at the way contemporary humans treated non-human animals, as I said, sentient as small children, and be incredulous. But obviously that's speculative.
And another small point we should make here, because most people have not heard about this, is the concept of speciesism, especismo in Spanish. Oscar Horta, a good friend, is a philosopher who specializes on this definition and points out very much that people should really understand it and know it so they can internalize it. So speciesism is essentially discriminating someone, some animal, some person, some being for their species, the species they belong and they're born in.
We need to be very careful here. I think a lot of people misunderstand what speciesism means. It doesn't mean that all species are equal. What this speciesism is discriminating against one being over another when the two beings are of equivalent sentience. Just like we are ethically entitled to prioritize the well-being of all humans over all Anopheles mosquitoes, because there is a severe, irreconcilable conflict of interest, and all humans are more sentient than Anopheles mosquitoes.
And capacity for suffering.
Yeah, exactly. So it's easy to misunderstand what the anti-speciesist is saying. It's equal consideration, essentially, that we would now recognize it is morally indefensible to discriminate against someone different ethnic group simply on grounds of the fact they belong to a different race. If you have two beings of comparable sentience, let's say a pig and a toddler.
And a dog.
Yeah, or a dog. Yeah. And with humans, at least, we often would recognize that the innocent and defenseless need more protection rather than less. And at the very least, I would say that, the non-humans in our factory farms should be loved and cared for instead of exploited. Realistically, though, how are we going to end animal agriculture in the quickest time? And though I will continue to moralize over veganism, vegetarianism, animal rights, by accelerating the development of cultured meat, farm-free animal products, we will hasten the end of animal agriculture. And one way to do this is right now to enact legislation that will close slaughterhouses, let's say 10 to 15 years in the future, so people can carry on eating meat as now, but the clock is ticking and there will be a tremendous commercial incentive for firms to develop, commercialize cultured meat and animal products. It sticks in my craw to say not now, because I would abolish slaughterhouses right now, but it's not sociologically, politically realistic.
We could set a date, by 2040 they have to close down. So the industry will hurry up and do the in vitro products, which is something we also advocate, and it's our declaration of principles. If we were to ever be elected and govern, etc., sounds like a miracle now, but any movement has to start small. And if we were to one day be important and influential, we would invest heavily on production of in vitro meats, even at a state level, so that those become available the sooner the better, because we know that there's this addiction to meat. Another point briefly about speciesism that I wanted to make, and that's why I brought it up, is that they raise us on a speciesist culture. And that's why when we're little, we're not worried when we hear about hunting or bullfighting, or we see it the way we're taught. We're educated, the way I was educated in the 70s anyway, was to be very casual about these things. And only later I saw that what a horror it is to go enjoy yourself by hurting a bull or animals that you're shooting at for fun. We have these instincts, yes, for hunting, etc., but we could derive them into video games or other ways that are less harmful. And then essentially what it takes to become less a speciesist, if not non-speciesist, but at least less a speciesist, would be to yourself reprogram your brain so that you start to feel and behave more empathically towards animals of all kinds, but especially the ones that you know are suffering most. Like you can be much more careful with a dog or a cow or a pig than an oyster, for example, or a sponge, which apparently doesn't seem to have a brain and suffer. But yeah, some people end up saying, what about plants? Plants suffer too. I don't think so. There's no, you can explain it, David.
Well,
There's
yes.
no similar central nervous system. There's no brain there. They have,
Some meat eaters affect a solicitous concern for the well-being of plants and say such things as, oh, science has proved plants feel pain. No, science hasn't shown this at all. That plants and other sessile organisms have not evolved an energetically expensive nervous system, so they haven't got the capacity for rapid self-propelled motion. Even if you think that consciousness is fundamental to the world, individual plant cells are encased in thick cellulose cell walls, so there's no phenomenal binding into subjects or experience with a pleasure-pain axis. So yes, you can continue to eat lettuces, radishes, and carrots with a clear conscience.
You can say there's information flows, but not
yeah.
processed in a way that it causes any kind of experience, right?
Yeah. So that is one of the other big strands of the Abolitionist Project. Intuitively, the problem of wild animal suffering is completely intractable. And most people would assume it's on the same level of kind of the second law of thermodynamics. How on earth can one possibly fix the problem of wild animal suffering? But if we are ethically serious, we now have the technical tools to fix the problem of wild animal suffering, using everything from cross-species fertility regulation, which can involve everything from immunocontraception to tunable synthetic gene drives to herbivorizing predators, again, genetic engineering, all kinds of makeshift solutions until we actually herbivorize them. But essentially the whole biosphere is going to become programmable later this century and beyond. And I think our long-term goal should be a pan-species welfare state. That for now is utopian. And before we start systematically helping sentient beings, we need to stop systematically harming them. But looking for the long-term future of life on Earth, do we want a living world in which billions upon billions of sentient beings starve to death or disemboweled, asphyxiated or eaten alive? Or do we want a living world in which all sentient beings can flourish? And if bioethically we decide, yeah, we want a happy biosphere underpinned by gradients of bliss, genetic engineering, gene drives, biotechnology.
Explain what gene drives are for people.
Sorry, apologies. Normally, man and a woman have kids. In the case of a gene with variant alleles, there's a 50-50 chance your kid will inherit one allele or the other. But gene drives create a form of biased inheritance. So if you want to make sure that all members of a free-living population in the wild have a desired mutation, it's possible to use CRISPR genome editing and a gene drive that ensures all an organism's offspring have the desired mutation, and it can spread through an entire free-living species. For example, the SCN9A gene, the so-called volume knob for pain. It's going to be possible for prospective human parents to choose what allele they would like for their prospective children: high pain tolerance, low pain tolerance, nonsense mutations that abolish pain. That would be very rash. But not merely humans, but non-human animals too. If we want to spread benign versions of the SCN9A gene to hundreds of thousands of different free-living species, we will have the technical ability to do so. An obvious response here is that this is reckless experimentation, but two things. First, all sexual reproduction is a form of, if you like, experimentation. The second is that before the use of gene drives in this way, one would use self-contained artificial biospheres. In practice, rather than tackle the problem of wild animal suffering, gene drives will probably be used to defeat vector-borne disease in Africa. That if we can, for example, make sure that all the offspring of Anopheles mosquitoes of a single sex, let's say male, then that non-violently, essentially the Anopheles mosquito goes extinct and we get rid of malaria. I'm glossing over all manner of complications, and any scientifically literate members of your audience will be hopping up and down at the potential challenges I'm glossing over. But nonetheless, stepping back, what do we want to be the long-term future of the biosphere?
Yeah.
I'd say we want to fix the problem of suffering, and transhumanists set out in the Transhumanist Declaration of 1998, reaffirmed in 2009, are committed to the well-being of all sentients, and that could just be empty verbiage, or it could be a policy option.
Which we signed, by the way, many years ago as an organization. I wanted to say that, of course, you've proposed one way to reduce the suffering, like herbivorizing predators and different ways, these gene drives and different things. There will be other ideas and other ways to do it. I've thought myself of the one where we would replace biological brains of prey animals with simple computers that can actually be consumed, maybe, but they're not biological in the sense that they're not going to have any feelings or any sentience. So creating animals that do not have an experience, essentially like plants. Walking plants, like you will see robots by Boston Dynamics, etc. So think of an evolved version of that with a completely biological body, just like a real animal, but no sentience there. It's just something that's going around eating just like the regular animal would do. And those could be food for other animals or for humans who insist on eating an actual animal when we have already the in vitro meat. So that's another solution. The AIs will come up with many other solutions, and then there will be a time when we have to vote on this in some way at a global level so that we can start doing it in a coordinated manner throughout the nature. How are we going to go about that? How are we going to vote as a planet? Because we have a few democracies or sort of democracies, none of them are perfect. But many, many countries were not democratic, run by dictators and despots and theocrats. And I mean, that's a whole other effort. We have to manage to convince people to force their leaders.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I have an espresso, please? If that double espresso, if that's okay.
Café con desert. Yep, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. Good idea. So yeah, that's a whole other cake to open, a whole other story, but it's important in the long run as far as ethical interventions in nature, because we could do it in a country, but the rest of the world is still going to be doing whatever. And if each country does a different thing, then that's not going to be good either. It would be better than nothing, but still doing some different things in different parts of the planet, everything's kind of interconnected. So
so something like a gene drive, one of the reasons they're interconnected is that if you release a gene drive here in Portugal, its implications will spread across the world. They can be weaponized too and used for all kinds of sinister purposes. So yeah, there's going to need to be an ethical debate. In terms of decision making, and this is going to be extremely moot, not just for the problem of wild animal suffering, but of course human governance. And transhumanists don't have an official policy here that all transhumanists agree on. Personally, I believe in a democratically elected United Nations. I think if we don't have some form of accountable world government, that there is likely to be nuclear war this century. This is a rather grim thought, even though in one sense I'm an incredible optimist. I think we're going to fix the problem of suffering. I think to get there are going to be all manner of traumas and tragedies. But back to the immediate topic here, yes, I would envisage at some stage later this century and beyond there will be something akin to a world government. In the case of the League of Nations and the United Nations, these international bodies were only set up in the aftermath of a terrible conflict. I very much hope that we can set up, essentially a democratically elected, accountable UN before there is some terrible conflict this century. Whether it will happen, I don't know. Another possibility is that essentially most people will simply acquiesce. I mean, it could be done by, kind of global referenda or something like that. It could just be, most people are not greatly exercised by the problem of wild animal suffering. So it may be it's simply done by acquiescence. Most people's response to, insofar as they've thought about the problem of wild animal suffering at all, most people, if you put to them the question, should humans interfere with nature? Most people will say no. But then if they're watching a wildlife documentary, some heart-rending scene, let's say, an elephant trapped in a mud hill or in a mud bath or something like that, and people are enraged that the cameraman kept on filming and doesn't intervene. Yeah. So there is a tension between most people's opinions here. And I think although some people are happy to weigh abstract principles, should humans assume compassionate stewardship over nature, and the way to win people over to the idea of compassionate intervention is to give them concrete, ideally visual represent scenes, and just ask them, is it right or wrong to intervene? And it's unproblematic that if a child is drowning you stumble across a child drowning in a shallow pond,
or surrounded by hyenas.
Or hyenas or something like that, essentially you intervene. So why not if the victim is of comparable sentience but a different species?
Firstly, we advocate for first creating Concert of Democracies, ideally, so something like the UN, but only democracies, so they can support and strengthen each other and defend each other, kind of like they do in a way, some democracies, but at a global level. If your country becomes a democracy, no matter where you are, big or small, we will help you, defend you, you will do more trade with you, and so on. And the others would see the benefits, would be jealous to be a part of this league and eventually move over. Then I envision also just citizen movements pushing their leaders to democratize somehow. Huge demonstrations, just by any means. It's happening somewhat in Iran. There's been this whole thing about how they mistreat women and make them wear these things, and in that vein, but stronger, hopefully with more international support in some way, because people are just ultimately being hurt by those governments when they try to complain. But one thing that could push democracy at a global level, I definitely think, is forcing these global, if not referendums, at least opinion polls, full sample opinion polls, something which our friend Paco Mota has written on his book. And when you ask someone something, or when you poll them or whatever, it would be good to have them at least read what they're going to be voting about. So if it has to do with animals, they would say you're going to vote a referendum about something like banning bullfighting, as an example. It's not that we're going to do it or anything like that, but then people would have to hear the arguments of the bullfighters and the whole industry that exploits the bulls and enjoys it, and and also the argument of the animal rights people saying, no, this is wrong because of this and this and this, speciesism, it's unnecessary, it's cruel, and then you decide. But you get all the arguments, at least be exposed to them, do a public information campaign, maybe even a little online test or something. Just something that if you're going to vote, we know that you're aware of the basic arguments for or against. And that would help to get the whole global population to be more pro, we're going to do interventions, because this is just unfathomable, unconscionable. Yes, it's the legacy of natural evolution, but it's gruesome. And it's unfair, and it's horrible and unethical.
Yes, though transhumanists are revolutionaries in one sense, I mentioned super intelligence, super longevity, and super happiness. One way in which we're not revolutionary is democracy, in that I need scarcely list the endless problems and pitfalls of democracy, but democracy allows accountability and a peaceful transfer of power, i.e. if enough of the population hate what a government is doing, they can peacefully kick the government out.
Yeah.
And so, at least for the foreseeable future, and possibly for the unforeseeable future too, essentially we need to strengthen and enrich democracy rather than change it. So yeah, very much transhumanists are orthodox. I mean, probably I can find exceptions too, but yeah, it's pretty core to transhumanism, essentially, democracy. I could talk more about what kind of biosphere do we want to live in? As I said, I personally find the idea of predation so monstrous. I would be happy if predatory species were non-violently allowed to go extinct. But one of the reasons why it's worth exploring ideas like you've just suggested just now, or herbivorizing predators, is that people who want to keep all of today's charismatic megafauna can essentially do so. A critic might now say, well, look, a lion who isn't asphyxiating a zebra isn't truly a lion. But, I'm just going to get some coffee. Yeah. Good. You're very kind.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado.
Cheers. But one might equally say, well, look, humans that start wearing clothes and stop bashing each over the head, truly human. And if those of us who do wear clothes and don't bash each other over the head and go vegan are not truly human, does it matter? I mean, this is the species essentialist argument, that a lion can continue to be a lion even if it isn't harming sentient beings. Likewise, we are still fundamentally human, even though we enjoy the trappings of a modern civilization.
So before we go into the questions that our friends wrote, and Encarnacion, who's there watching with us, I wanted to briefly tell you that one of the things that also drove me to become more animal suffering aware, etc., was the idea of creating artificial general intelligence, and how people always talked about aligning them with human values. So if you align them with human values, then in some countries they will, they're fine with eating dogs, or here they're fine with eating pigs, obviously. So which values, first of all? And then as soon as you give it a moral sense, an advanced AI, so advanced that it's smarter than us and better at moral reasoning, is going to find this conflict and this dilemma, like, how are you teaching me to be good to babies or to take care of older people, but then to do harm to animals. Like if they're going to be our assistants and we can give them orders to help us, I'm thinking about autonomous robots, which will come around very soon, I think, because we have the tools now to produce these smart intelligences. And we have the dexterity on the robotics. It's just a matter of time now, maybe 5 or 10 years, that we'll have autonomous robots walking our dogs and doing this and that. But some people could just, for fun, say, strangle that cat. So it should not hurt the cat. It should say, no, I don't do these things. My programming does not allow me to hurt any animals. And I think that would be a way to normalize artificial intelligence, advanced artificial intelligence, so it's not having this constant conflict within itself and having to follow bad instructions, basically.
An even bigger problem than sentience-friendly artificial intelligence is sentience-friendly biological intelligence. And that, if one thinks of the way humans behave towards non-humans, or of course members of predatory species behave to their victims, to herbivores, that is an immense challenge. But yes, the problem of sentience-friendly AI, as standardly posed, is if we assume that this escalating range of cognitive capacities of artificial intelligence continues to increase, and the idea is that AI will surpass humans in essentially all cognitive capacities. And what follows next? Unlike most transhumanists, I'm actually a skeptic about AGI. I do not think computers with an existing architecture, classical architecture, are capable of being sentient. The entire empirical realm is inaccessible to them. And the reason is that computers with a classical architecture, classical Turing machines, LLMs and so forth, they cannot solve the binding problem. That, for all practical purposes, they are insentient. And even if you think consciousness, this is a bit of a philosophical argument, forgive me if you're not interested in this kind of stuff, even if you were to replace the ones and zeros with a classical Turing machine with discrete pixels of experience, execute the code as before, however fast your speed of execution of the program, however complex your code, all you've got is a micro-experiential zombie. So our computers, AI, is not going to wake up. It's when humans talk about consciousness, your, ChatGPT-4 or something like that might seem to be sentient, but it's a digital zombie. And this hardwired ignorance of consciousness, phenomenally bound consciousness, has computational functional consequences. That said, I should stress I'm a bit out on a limb here, that most transhumanists do believe in the imminence of AGI followed by ASI, and I could be completely mistaken. I've not the slightest doubt that 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time, I would be blown away by AI, kind of robots in all kinds of ways. But I would say we are creating idiot savants.
But even non-sentient AGI will be able to do amazing moral reasoning. It will be able to do moral reasoning and point out that we're making a huge mistake, or even antagonize us because we're doing this.
Yes, but nonetheless there is an important sense in which a zombie is fundamentally ignorant. Now, it's possible to argue that consciousness, sentience, pleasure, pain axis, it's no more computational significance than the textures of the pieces in a game of chess. And in Stockfish or other AI chess program, it can outperform humans even though there's no consciousness, no binding. That, Magnus Carlsen can see a board in the way that you or I can't, and you or I can see a chessboard in the way that someone with simultanagnosia who can only see one piece at a time. We've got binding, and so in one sense we know more than a digital computer, and yet at the same time essentially stockfish can outperform us at chess. And some people would say, well, it doesn't matter that our machines aren't going to wake up. Consciousness is causally, functionally irrelevant. The argument against this view is that consciousness has causal functional powers, not least to talk about its own existence, as I'm doing now. That if consciousness were purely epiphenomenal, as philosophers say, i.e. it was just something with no causal power, just a byproduct, it wouldn't be able to talk about its own existence. So, as I said, this is a controversial opinion, take it with a grain of salt, although we are going to be creating something like so-called narrow superintelligence. We're not going to be creating full spectrum superintelligences with today's computer architecture.
So I am going to ask you a few questions, David, that our friends prepared, just to see what comes out of this. They're great questions, but they're difficult questions, difficult to respond, I'm sure. So let's do best we can. How can we maximize the chances that ethical transhumanism and futurism becomes a major political narrative without being subject to two key challenges, being captured by the mechanisms of polarization and so-called culture wars, and being subject to value drift or dilution that could threaten the positive moral sign of its development? By creating transhumanist political parties with the right goals.
I think if you ask, not merely if you ask members of the general population what is a transhumanist, but if you ask transhumanists themselves what is a transhumanist, you would get a variety of different answers. So I think simplifying and simplifying again so one gets absolutely core, crisp transhumanist principles that aren't just woolly-minded generalities. And advertisers have the so-called law of threes, and this is one reason I'm keen on using the three supers acronym, super intelligence, super longevity, and super happiness, as just a little memorable, sharp cartoon of what transhumanists are, what we're about. I would give...
I also say super morality sometimes, or super ethics, or, you know.
A lot of people, a lot of transhumanists would agree with the three supers, but they would want to add another super, but they can't. People don't agree what the extra super is. My normal response is that a sufficiently rich conception of superintelligence will incorporate all the others, including super morality, a full spectrum superintelligence that can impartially access and weigh all possible first-person perspectives, human and non-human, will, in virtue of this fact, behave ethically. And that's quite question-begging, of course, but back to what I was saying, one really does need to hone things and have crisp definitions. In one sense, it's a very boring way to start any discussion. Let us define our terms. But we should be clear what transhumanism is, what are core principles, and what's incidental.
What are some highly tractable, quick, bipartisan or multi-partisan transhumanist futurist wins that could promote benevolent transhumanist narratives and policies among the decisive circles and the broader public?
Well, something like cultured, essentially full funding, state-sponsored funding, as well as incentives to commercial firms for the development of cultured meat and animal products.
Well, age reversal.
Anti-aging technologies, it can be done in very grandiose terms of let's fix the problem of aging, or it can be done in more modest incremental interventions. One way, it would be pricey but not prohibitively pricey, would be to offer opt-out cryonics. So as a default, instead of burying or cremating people, essentially it was the routine that you went into the cryonics tank. one of the many advantages of this is essentially you can at least in part defang death. And it's still sad losing loved one who goes into the cryonics tank, but visiting grandpa in the cryonics tank isn't as sad as visiting, well, a grave or something like that.
No, we have that policy. We would do it, state funded, so that everybody can get this for free. Cryonics is not an expensive practice. We always make sure to let people know that it only takes a few thousand euros in the liquids necessary for the perfusion to get someone frozen. And if it was done at a state level, it's way cheaper than a funeral.
Yeah.
So and also pre-mortem cryonics and pre-agonal cryonics. If you have a debilitating disease that's eating up your brain, and then you just want to end it so you're not suffering or whatever, then get frozen earlier, and even without waiting for you to die and wait a few minutes,
Yes, I mean, there needs to be a better brand than cryoeuthanasia, but essentially not forcing people to go on living when essentially their quality of life is... There need to be immense safeguards. For example, older people worried about eating into their kids' inheritance with expensive medical treatment. I mean, there need to be safeguards, but essentially opt-out cryonics and opt-in cryoeuthanasia should be on the political menu. Controversial, yes, but not so far outside the Overton window that they would be dismissed out of hand. Most people simply won't have a prior opinion on this until you ask them.
How to optimally address the issues of a frequent, though not exclusive, opposition to transhumanism, futurism from highly religious and right-wing circles, knowing that the opposition is frequently not justified by the doctrine, modeling after the examples of the introduction of anesthesia and CPR.
Yes, in front of a religious audience, it helps to draw on traditional texts, and even the most radical transhumanist positions will often have some form of traditional sanction. I would give as an example here the idea of reprogramming predators, pan-species welfare state. This really does sound madcap futurism, but actually, you go to the Bible, the book of Isaiah, where the lion and the wolf are lying down with the lamb. It's all in the Bible. Now, sure, the Bible doesn't go into the technical details, but if you take the Bible seriously, and apparently worldwide there are hundreds of millions of biblical literalists, then there really is going to be a living world where the lion and the wolf lie down with the lamb. Now, okay, that's an extreme example, but yeah, ideas such as fixing the problem of suffering, life extension, enhancing cognitive capacities, these are ancient roots.
I know plenty of right-wing people who classically or their family votes typically on the right side of, or libertarians who are very, very ethical and who are very... they accept a lot of these ideas, or they take seriously our aim to extend life without a problem. Like, what's wrong with getting rid of aging? This makes everyone so sad and frail, and then we're always remembering our grandparents who left us, and it doesn't need to happen, We should all join in effort on really making this happen.
Yeah, aging is, in some ways, it's different from abolitionism in that...
it's a different thing.
It's recognizable...
We're talking about transhumanism.
Recognizable extensions of existing technologies could fix the problem of suffering, whereas in the case of aging, although cryonics is feasible, we don't yet understand well enough aging to be able to say there's a fix to the problem. And although plenty of people will offer rationalizations of aging, if we actually develop the tools to defeat aging, essentially all opposition will rapidly recede. One only needs to see the way, some new anti-wrinkle cream is swept from the shelves. if and when, and I think it is a case of when, aging is treated as a preventable or at least treatable disease, a lot of opposition will simply melt away. And who is going to argue that people should be forced to grow old against their will? But we do need a twin track strategy as transhumanists here, because there can be something almost cruel telling people science is going to find a cure for aging after you're dead. Whereas by combining the Aubrey de Grey and the Sens route of essentially helping rejuvenate existing humans, it needs to be combined with cryonics and cryoeuthanasia for people who realistically know that they're not going to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what our friend Jose Luis Cordero calls Plan B. If you can make it to Plan A, we would all like to have Plan B for ourselves and our loved ones who want it. Obviously, nothing is mandatory. Just like if we have these therapies to rejuvenate, nobody has to do it if they don't want to. But most people will choose it because it's just painful and sad to get older and to die.
It's this term, often one leaves out the term involuntary because it might seem redundant. So I say, get rid of suffering when I should be strictly saying get rid of involuntary suffering, or get rid of aging, strictly get rid of involuntary aging, because you'll get some critics saying that they wouldn't want, well, no one is going to force you to be happy or force you to stay young. The question is, once the technology has become available, should we be forcing people to endure a biology of suffering against their will, or forcing them to grow old? So one can take a very libertarian angle to this as well as a paternalist angle.
What kind of positions should transhumanist parties take on more regular political issues such as taxation, social welfare, and cultural matters to avoid alienating the generally positively inclined audiences that will weigh in strong alliance with ethical transhumanism versus differences regarding more prosaic everyday matters?
That's difficult. I mean, the cop-out would be to say that transhumanism can transcend left and right and traditional labels like that. In practice, not so simple at all. There are transhumanists that could crudely be labeled left-wing and others crudely labeled right-wing. However, something like universal basic income can cut across, to a large degree at any rate, traditional left-right divisions. I'd say it is pretty much a precondition of any civilized society. Basic income, access to education, medical care, accommodation. I mean, what level one actually sets this universal basic income at would be controversial, but it won't completely unite left and right, but universal basic income would slash the kind of welfare bureaucracy, guarantee a decent well, I say decent standard of living, but a modest standard of living for everyone. Yeah.
And the robots are coming for our jobs, because most people don't like working, don't like being employed and doing this job over and over every day of your life, 5 days a week, almost every week of the year, except for a month or something. It's really, it takes your life away. It takes your time, it takes your life, and pretty soon we won't have to do it. So we have to find a solution, because people still need to eat and raise their kids and have a roof over their heads. So it's only ethical, it's ambitious, it's utopic in a sense. I think it's quite practical, like it could be done. We like Henry George's philosophy of taxing land, and also now thinking about taxing the work of robots. So if you have a factory full of robots working, they can pay taxes. I mean, the employer would pay taxes for them, but somehow capturing that wealth of technology and lack of work for humans, because there won't be as much. So we have to go in that direction, I think, for sure, yes or yes. So I hope other parties come along and join us too, because I think we're the only ones advocating for a basic income. And traditionally it could be thought of as very left-wing, the idea of a basic income is like, well, everybody's going to have a salary for free. What about the ones who are actually working? But people can work all they want. Nobody stops you from working harder, from doing your own business, your own home business, whatever. But the basic income thing is the thing that takes away the existential angst and a lot of depression, because otherwise you can't put food in the table. You can't put a roof over your head. You have to pay a rent that takes all your salary or half of it. We have to work this out. The sooner the better, because the robotic revolution is coming. AI is here to stay. Robots will be here the day after tomorrow. So
yeah, essentially anything that can be digitized, one is really going to have an unlimited abundance of. It doesn't mean to say there can be an unlimited abundance of everything, status goods, old masters, only a finite number of those. But yeah, essentially already got a state now where essentially the world's population, anyone has access to all the world's literature, music. I mean, sure, a lot is pirated and the thorny issues of intellectual property, but essentially it's cutting across traditional left and right. Let's say access to music. In the past, something like music, only the rich could afford to kind of listen to concerts and stuff like that, whereas now everyone can listen on their phone. And of course their phone, they may have the very latest iPhone or a very cheap product, but without sounding too starry-eyed and without glossing over the problems of extreme poverty, it is very egalitarian digitization.
Immaterial abundance, right?
Yeah.
But we want both. We want material and immaterial abundance. We are definitely focused on abundance.
But I think, a lot of, obviously, traditional political parties, they are focused on environmental reform, which is absolutely critical. What distinguishes transhumanism, particularly the particular strand that I'm interested in fixing the problem of suffering, is stressing that the environmental must be combined with the biological genetic, because otherwise the hedonic treadmill will still grind and we will still be having the same discussion about suffering 50, 500, 5,000 years time.
Yeah, I think we're in complete agreement there. How to reconcile the partisan and tribal aspects inherent to politics and political parties with the desire to make transhumanism as neutral as prosthetics or emergency medicine. How to navigate the relationship between transhumanist politics and transhumanist projects that want to avoid being embedded in political conflicts or even avoid being labeled as transhumanist at all, to maintain a less controversial public image. Should we come up with a different branding and terminology? I think it's too late for that, but go ahead.
Really, I hope that all political parties steal our clothes, so to speak. That although, and this is entirely admirable, there are transhumanist political parties, it's much better if mainstream political parties essentially adopt with or without acknowledgement. It doesn't matter.
Without the word, the T word.
Yeah, and there have been, not all transhumanists are comfortable with the label transhumanism. The reason that the World Transhumanist Association rebranded as Humanity Plus is that some people are scared by the label transhumanism, but.
I think the cat is out of the bag, and I think it's important also not to shy away from it in a way.
I'm a transhumanist.
We don't shy away from it, and we wish it would be used more in TV and etc. because it's an important subject and movement, and the world, at least Spain, is just being too slow on talking about this and on supporting organizations like our party.
Absolutely,
we really want lots of people to help us grow, because without people, what politics are you
I
going to
hope
have?
you become a mass party. Yes, very much so.
If David could become a benevolent transhumanist ruler with a lot of individual power for one day in a large country like the US or the supranational EU, what kind of top 3 policies tractable in our current circumstances would he implement?
First thing I would do, I would outlaw slaughterhouses. Not in 10, 15 years' time, but absolutely now. the death factories are obscene beyond words. As I said, one can say things like pig is as sentient as a small child, but just how many people have really actually thought through what this actually means in terms of what we're doing? So yeah, number one, I would outlaw slaughterhouses, and one of the side effects of outlawing slaughterhouses is that people would live longer and live healthier. What else? Two others. I would, well, universal basic income. We've just that essentially universal, UBI, universal healthcare, and universal access to housing. I would ensure that all prospective parents can have pre-implantation genetic screening, counselling, opt-out cryonics, and I would, beyond that, set up research groups for long-term future of the biosphere, fixing the problem of wild animal suffering. Now, strictly, that was not three, so let's say with various subdivisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, Encarnacion says that she can't think of anything new that we haven't already debated that is in these subjects. Is great, and so many years of your work. Only to thank you for being the tip of the spear in ethics on all subjects, really, but on this important subject of reducing suffering in the world. You are a hero of ours.
Bless you. I mean, I don't know what to say of that. I'm unfortunately essentially a writer, not a doer, but thank you for helping to turn words into action with the party. And
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys. See you next time.